And I'm gonna be high.
Good on you, Donald. I'm the Rocket Man, yeah.
I'm a rocket man. And I'm gonna be
Rocket Man. I'm a rocket man. I wanna go to the moon.
So we got Chad Olesen. Really doesn't need much of an intro. Where are you out of right now? What mountain is that, Chad?
I'm in Sedona right now.
Oh, so you're Arizona. Okay,
Arizona
that's pretty
right
good
now.
climate for you. I'm in Fargo today, and it's snowing this morning. A little bit different climate. But look at this. We both have coffee, and we're both talking logistics. So here we
Yeah.
go.
I still have the Sherpa on too, though.
You do. You do. I mean, you got the vibe going.
Yeah.
I am jealous of those pine trees in the background, though, because we do have pine trees here. Of course, they do look different. Ours are a bit more ready for winter, full of snow. It's Thanksgiving is always like a hit or miss. Sometimes we're playing catch with the football and it's 70 degrees, and this year we've already had 2 storms and it's like 6 inches of snow so far. So we'll be doing it differently. But in Fargo, we just say hopefully it doesn't snow on Thanksgiving so everybody can get to where they're going. It's our main goal.
Are you from Fargo?
Yep, I'm in
Awesome.
Fargo.
That's
But
cool.
I travel to Minnesota for like holidays. My parents live in Minnesota, and so do my wife's parents. Same
That's
hometown,
awesome.
which is easy. So, how about you, dude? So obviously you're the founder of AVRL. We'll get into that in the episode. We'll probably cover some recent events. We'll cover how you're going to market. I want to talk a little bit about more tactical. You guys is like strategy for running a business, your tech stack, how you manage employees, how you source employees, things like that. But I think I kind of wanted to start out with you as far as like, can you tell me what AVRL is? I think the whole market knows kind of what you guys do, but you're so advanced in a lot of the technologies. People are like, well, I know they do bids, but like, what is AVRL in a nutshell for you?
Man. AVRL is an automation company. I would like to separate us away. Like, we are not a pricing platform. And I know some of our competitors like to like market that like we're a really expensive pricing tool.
Yeah, I've heard that marketing before.
We are an automation company first and foremost, and we in 2021 decided to go off on this journey to compete with robotic process automation, which most of the people
RPA.
listening would think of that as web scrapers. What we did was we had built our own browser. We went and built our own browser. And what it allows us to do is manipulate HTML and insert HTML inside of web systems that someone doesn't own. Why that's important is that I could go into a system like SAP ECC6 or a legacy ERP system that can be exposed in browser, and I can add functionality that doesn't exist. And that is the whole premise of what our company is based on, is to change the way that we navigate web automation. And first and foremost, we are a web automation tool and platform. That is like what we are. Where 3PLs and carriers started to use us was that when they work with enterprise level shippers, they have to access those systems across the internet, but they don't own them. And they get updated constantly. They're constantly changing. They might put 2-factor authentication on them. And how do you essentially control the page as if you owned it? And that's how 3PLs and carriers use us today. Spot bidding is our largest use case for 3PLs and carriers. We automate about 25 million spot transactions a month right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if that number doubles year over year for unforeseeable future. We also do like a lot of other use cases. Like, we might have a customer that works with a shipper that uses US Bank and they have to go into Syncada or CAS or E2Open or Manhattan to do an invoice rate verification. We go in and automate those tedious tasks as well. And I don't know. That's how I would describe it as what we are, though.
And for the audience's benefit, my interpretation of a traditional RPA, robotic process automation, would be scraping websites. You know, in LTO, we use that to get tracking updates from the carrier websites, bring it back in. You can do that via API. You can have a push or a webhook. But what you're saying is that you're able to create what I would maybe call a bot browser instead of a scraper, and it would be able to manipulate the HTML or the code on the
Yeah.
page, add or edit, and get information probably faster. Is
Yeah.
that, do you think you can probably do more per second per minute than an RPA then? And if in that case, because you're not rate limited?
This is going to sound insane, but I could run a web page faster than an API transaction.
Yeah, APIs get throttled all the time in our industry. And
Yeah.
like sometimes it's a 30-second API pull to get a quote, and
Yep.
there's like 12 carriers you're trying to quote with. I know on the truckload side, you're probably working with the brokerage or the carrier to create a rating matrix that is going to go rate every time based on cost per mile, distance, and fuel. But
1,000 parameters, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because of our customer base, like we have intermodal brokers that have unique strategies. We might have a customer that measures elevation gain on a route to understand when they could hedge on fuel. I think that's what we are really pride ourselves on, is like we want to go after the most complex things. Like if you don't really want complex logic, we might be the Ferrari for you to take your kids to school in, you know?
right.
Yeah.
I always say that scenario about a couple of my employees that I'm like, hey, if we're not letting him do this, then he's just a Ferrari driving around the block, showing it off, but it's not going full speed. So not pivoting here. I'm actually going to ask you about pivoting, but AVRL was always this, or did you do something else? I think I heard you on a different podcast talk about pivoting in 2020. And then I saw your LinkedIn post, and we'll get into LinkedIn too and talk about that. But you talked about creating product and then doing a pivot and how you went through that. What did you pivot, and why did you pivot?
So when I started working on AVRL with my CTO in 2015 or 2016, we were Advanced Voice Research Labs. That's what AVRL originally stood for. And we were a natural language processing company, so not voice tech company. What we process unstructured data into structured data formats. And that was what we wanted to do. We wanted to take that into ERP. We wanted to take it into WMS and essentially allow people to speak to those systems and automate the transactions. SAP gave us money to essentially not necessarily change that vision, but to bring that vision to life. It's a lot harder to get data in and out of a legacy system than people think.
Yeah.
And when we ended up doing our pivot, it was away from the voice aspect, and it was towards connecting disparate systems, so connecting systems that don't talk to one another. Most systems today, I mean, I even look at like a lot of the shipper system, there's probably only like 4 or 5% of them that expose APIs. And so how do you go and automate the rest of them, you know?
Would you say that you can augment APIs too? So you might be able to have some of your integration via API, but there might not be a payload or a reference field that you can actually get the info you need, whether it's an invoice audit, like we have to verify the rate before we create the invoice. But can you use API and then, augment that with your tools to supplement an integration?
Yeah, we even if you like, I'm gonna step away from pricing. Like obviously pricing API, we augment those and change those, etc. But when you look at like a TMS, so we use like McLeod. A lot of our customers will use us as what are called business add-ins or bodies. Well, we'll bolt on top of it, provide an additional logic layer that could route data to another system, back into this system, change the workflow of a system. And so you think of like automated load building. Well, a lot of the EDI that comes across doesn't have enough data to really create the load. But I could pull that data from other areas inside of the TMS or from another system to automate the load building process. And so we do, I mean, dude, we probably have like 40 business add-ins that we go and bolt into TMS. And it really depends on the gaps inside of the TMS. Like Revenova will have different gaps, and like McLeod which would have different gaps in like a Mercury Gate, etc.
Yeah. And you're talking about, I mean, Revenova is a newer one. I think it runs on Salesforce, but they're the Salesforce experts, but Mercury Gate and McLeod have always been difficult to, if you want a customer to move off of them and onto yours, or if you're trying to integrate into Mercury Gate, I've done that before. It's not easy. No. And some of it can be EDI, some can be API, but even in like, I live in the LTL world primarily, SMC3 and Mercury Gate are married, right? And so a lot of the integrations have to be into Mercury Gate. but there's no API capability. And so you have to custom integrate every time. Taking a step back from the technical jargon, but why do you post on LinkedIn? What's your strategy there? When did you start? What was your reason for starting?
Man, I don't know when I started or what my reasoning was. And I didn't have like a goal, to be honest. I was just, when we came into transportation, I'm sitting here and I'm like, all right, carrier hates the 3PL. 3PL doesn't get along with the shipper. Shipper doesn't get along with the carrier. Like, this is like crazy. And I just started writing because I was like, this is kind of insane. I was just writing like the things that I saw or felt. And what was happening was I wasn't gaining a lot of traction, but people were texting me like crazy. Like, oh, I love that post. Can't like it, obviously. But like, you know. And so what I write for now is for that community. There's like, I have a huge community of people that I talk to constantly, all day, every day, a lot of our customers. And I'm writing things that a lot of people feel. They just feel trapped by the politics of the industry, that they can't write them themselves. And that could even be like me writing about startups getting like taken advantage of by a conference host, like extorting them for a lot of money to speak and then not packing that full of people. I don't care if they're buyers or not, like should be people in that audience. We should be encouraging people to be in that audience. But then I like get on a call with someone that runs a TMS and they're like, thank you for writing that. Like, we feel that, but we have a good relationship with them. We can't write that.
The politics, it's not actual like, Trump, Biden, Kamala politics, but the politics of freight are actually pretty set in.
Yeah.
And there's only a few people who speak out and they get a lot of backlash. And you do get a lot of pushback on your posts. And there's a few others that, probably are. Well, I would actually say that you're probably the only CEO actually still running a company today. And I don't know how many employees you guys have.
100.
Yeah, so you're running a company with 100 employees and it's heavy in tech and you're in the freight industry and you're posting about, I wouldn't even call them controversial topics, just you're kind of saying out loud what a lot of people think and you're giving leadway for others to do it, but that comes with its arrows being slung. Do you think that, like when I first started seeing you post on LinkedIn, I kind of thought you were posting like, they were more like Twitter posts, but they were for LinkedIn, right? They're shorter form, they're a thought. Yeah. It's not long form. It's not articles. It's not an essay about a paper you wrote. It's just whatever you're thinking. And in your thoughts and what I'm hearing are informed by what your customers and contemporaries are talking about.
Yeah.
And so how do you take the arrows? What do you think of that side of it and the controversy that you end up stirring?
I'm sure that there are companies that won't work with AVRL because of what I write online. And I think that that is a great idea for them. We want to be a super authentic company. Like, what you see is what you get. If we think you're going to make a bad decision, we're going to tell you. You get to make the decision, like as the customer, if you want. But how I write on LinkedIn is also how I run my organization. And if very many people have met a lot of people on my team, like we're all super opinionated. A lot of type A going on, and we want to be like the challenger. It's how like Ray Dalio built Bridgewater, super argumentative organization that really comes in and gets shit done. And that's really who we want to be as a company.
Let's talk about your org, not specifically AVRL, but just running a company with 100 employees. I mean, I can make an assumption and say a lot of them are engineers, but do you have like how's your org structure pan out? Do you have a C-suite and VPs? Do you have a board? I think people are interested in how freight companies actually run. They might see Chad and they might see me posting, but like what's underneath that and how does a company run? How do you structure the org?
We definitely have a board. Because we're venture backed, we have to have a board. When we look at our organization, I almost sit side by side with my CTO, to be honest. I was the least technical engineer on our founding team. And so I got to be the CEO. Like, that's how that shaped up, And then we have a layer of directors that sit underneath us. And those directors might run ops. One might run professional services and integration. One might run sales organization. Another one might run growth. And those people report direct to me. Anyone who works with us knows about this team. We have a Navy SEAL Team 6 team, and I run that team at AVRL. And so a lot of the complex integration stuff that we're doing, I'm the one that's leading that team that goes in and does that complex work.
So you're doing
that's a dotted line team directly to me. My CTO also has a dotted line Navy SEAL team that reports to him that are like tier 1 engineers on our team.
I like the way that you do that because I think when people hear 100 employees, they probably think C-suite, VP, senior manager, or director, senior manager, manager, and it gets so watered down. I don't know if a flat org is the answer, but I do like the way you did it with, or you're saying it with like a Navy SEAL team, right? You have a 6-person team. It's almost a straight line. Everybody's got a competency and they tackle a project at a time. How do you balance that with saying, hey, what's our product going to be to the market next year? Like how much projections versus actual dirty work do you do?
The team that works for me, we're doing the dirty work today. That's getting implemented today. The one that my CTO runs, that is our R&D team that is working on product, not for next year, for the following year. All the product that we're going to roll out next year, already in beta, already being tested, where we try and move like as fast as possible on that stuff.
I like to hear it. I got another question for you, and I don't know, you don't have to share all of this or you can share some details, but so I talk a lot about VC. AVRL being a VC-backed company, and you might think, or the market might think, oh, Gabe doesn't think VC should belong in freight. But my opinion is VC doesn't belong in brokerage, or tools that no one needs. But how do you look at VC? Can you break down, maybe not how your company's structured, but you have a board, there's a fund, you have series that you raise. How do you align your strategic goals with like your people and your culture along with where you have to get to revenue wise, and how do you manage all that?
I might not be the best person to ask this question to because I'm so different in how we funded the company. What we had done was we had raised safes, and those safes are essentially instruments of debt, and they only convert at a specific equity. Like if I were to raise an equity round, then they would convert into shares. So today, my founding team owns 100% of AVRL. We own 100% control of AVRL. We don't have any control by VC. And I think that every single startup should try and model that. And
so you did venture debt safes based off of equity positions, but as long as you don't raise, they never convert.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's probably one of the hardest. We raise an uncapped safe. It's probably the hardest thing to raise. And usually what happens is when you're a profitable company, you can raise them, and it's someone betting that at some point you will need equity in a future position. We just hit profitability so quickly that we didn't end up raising again. It wasn't like a strategic plan. It wasn't X. We still talk to our venture capital teams all the time, because if there was something that we were like, hey, we need to invest in this and we want to go do this like right now, we would interact on it. We just haven't found that like opportunity that we're like, hey, we can't pay for this with debt that we have, like that we could get in the market, or we can't pay for this with cash that we have on hand. I think what's interesting that a lot of startups don't realize is that like a company like mine, I probably have as much more EBITDA than they would raise like in a Series A in a singular year. And so I don't want to go out and raise. I'd rather just pay for it and self-invest back into our own R&D. And that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, and then you're adding enterprise value for your employees and you, the people who own all of it.
Yeah.
I do think that I want to walk through part of the trap of VC, and what the reason I started this podcast is to talk to founders who have done it and who are still doing it, right? Not people who have like exited and said, hey, here's all the things I might have changed, but to talk to people who are still building it and their opinions change year over year and maybe month over month. But, I think when people talk about VC, there's success stories like Chad, because he raised safes, which is very difficult, and you had to convince people to do that. They don't just offer that out to the market. But most of the time, people have this idea of like, I'll trade equity for money, and it's not debt, but it is. It's not. It's not a loan, but you got to pay that back, and the only way to pay that back is to sell or to raise again and get people off the cap table, and they get caught on it's a mousetrap. They just continually have to get to a new revenue number to be able to raise the next series, to be able to get their investors made whole, or they have to force a sale to a competitor.
Yeah.
Talk through your opinion on how that cycle of trading equity early on could end up leaving a founder not in control of his company, and that's what I think happens way too often in freight.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie The Little Mermaid?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've got two daughters that are toddlers, and we watch it at least once a month.
So she sells her voice to be able to walk on land and has to
Yeah.
convince somebody to like kiss her or fall in love. I don't know. I don't have any kids yet, so I
Oh, he has
know
to
the
kiss
whole-
her, but it has to be true love's first kiss.
Okay,
Can't
she
just
loves
be
first
anybody.
kiss. Like, imagine if that never happened in that movie. And she sold her voice 4 legs, but was mute for the rest of her life. That is
Yeah.
actually how I think that a lot of venture capital is that you're like, you give away so much power. You get like, people give away board seats at like C. They give away board seats at A, which is insane because it's such a little amount of money for what you're going to try and accomplish. And every time they end up taking an equity position, there's preference shares. Most founders don't know how to navigate that. They don't know how to like they don't
A's
know how
and
to-
B's and
Oh my
preference.
God.
Yeah.
I have friends who raised like super high valuations in 2022 when like the market was still like just pumping startups for
Yeah. The
cash.
ZERP era. Yeah.
Yeah, and then this year they really needed to raise money and they couldn't. They literally couldn't. Their
They have to
current
do a down
investors-
round.
Their current investors don't want to do the down round. They can't get new people on their cap table because their old investors don't want to participate in their equity raise, and it puts them in this like super like tight position where they basically just run out of cash. And what a lot of startups don't necessarily realize is like, for a certain VC, running a company running out of money and them writing that off as debt, that's not bad. That's not a bad thing either, you know. So
Yeah,
like,
especially since they're swinging for 1 out of every 50 companies as a home run, and 49 can be losers to them because it's a fund and that's their risk, right? And
Yeah.
so the incentives fall in that order.
yeah. And so
If you think about, so I think about the final mile space a lot. That's where we're kind of like making inroads right now. We started in LTL and we're really making a splash in final mile. Every tech company in final mile, and I know a lot of the founders, all of them cannot raise right now.
yeah,
They can't get their next round because they raised in 21 and 22 and they have a valuation problem. They're actually still, in my opinion, they'd be more investable today than they were in seed or A.
Yeah.
Because their company is better, but they get stuck in this. They have to do a bridge round or a down round, and the investors don't want to be washed. And I've seen a lot of like the first leading signs of consolidation there, where the companies that have enough money will just consolidate and do equity swaps and just wash all the investors off the table, but take all the tech.
yeah,
And so that's in the final mile space. There's like 5 or 6 companies that are all vying for one spot to be the API connection to the final mile carriers. And, you know, someone's going to win. Uber's
Yeah.
trying. I think Uber will make a splash and buy maybe 5 of them at once, something crazy, because they can do it for pennies.
yeah.
And I know that they've been trying to do that. So,
Yeah, those deals are also awful, right, for the founder, because what's going to happen is they're going to be based off of like tranches. So you're going to get like a 3-year earnout. They're going to fire you year 1. So like, really, if you sold a company, I'm just use like a round number, for 50 million, and it was a 3-year payout, and the first year you get 10, and then X, like they just bought that company for 10 million bucks and fired you and said thank you very much, bye.
yeah. Or they can't sell for the valuation that maybe they took a safe the first time, but it had converted, and now they can't sell unless it's for 30 million. And if they
Yeah.
sell for under 30, they get $0.
Yeah.
People don't realize that side of it too, where
Oh my gosh.
you have to have a certain target for exit, and if you don't hit it, the founder might own 28% still, but get 0 because they sold for under the value.
Yeah,
And so-
I think that's probably the most common thing that happens to startup founders. Like, of my friends who have started companies, they sold a company for like 90 million bucks. They made 0 because they didn't sell it for what that threshold was.
Yeah, it's just massive bet after massive bet. So I'm not saying that VC or bootstrap or private equity or angel is the right method, but I do think that people think VC is shiny, but behind the scenes, the founders, it's the hardest life you could have, because you have to continue to make revenue. You have to show a good face to your employees, or else you don't have a good culture. But you know, if you don't hit that next revenue target and you don't sell for the right amount, only the investors get their money back. And
Yeah.
so it's a big risk.
And you have to answer questions to people who know nothing about your business all day long.
Yeah, let me talk about that. So one of my theses is that many entrepreneurs and founders are over mentored by people who don't have the right context about their business. They are
I like
very
that.
smart. They might be the best finance person they know. And they ask about evaluation, or they ask about bringing in a partner, and they say, hey, you're worth way more than that. Your company's worth way more. Don't bring in this strategic partner. And they say no to it because they were mentored. I just had that happen. I tried to acquire a company, and they said, hey, we're worth way more than that. And I said, yeah, but you don't understand. That guy doesn't understand the value that Rocket will bring, and you're going to have equity in Rocket, and that would be a good thing. They didn't even consider it. They said no. I moved on. But I think that being over mentored is the founder's main problem by people who don't have the context of their business. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, so I grew up in Oregon, and I was a part of the Oregon startup ecosystem for forever, and I like idolized these people who were like, and then I went to go raise money, and one of the guys literally told me, he was like, yeah, I know Alexis Ohanian. I was like, no shit, could you get me a meeting? And then I'm literally watching this startup like pitch thing, and a guy from the audience raises his hand and asks Alexis Ohanian a question, and it's this guy, and I could tell by his voice. I'm like, holy cow, do you really know him or no? And he's like, well, I met him once, and then like then he's gonna invest in my company, but he couldn't because he needed to remodel his kitchen. And I'm like sitting here as a founder, and my CTO is like, like super smart, was working at Citibank and leverage finance. He's like, oh my gosh, Chad, like we've been going down this path of like idolizing these people who like we really are we've already outpaced them at this point. We got to stop. And it wasn't until I moved to Seattle and I started to hang out with like, John Connors, like the former CFO of Nike, and like these guys that like were like actually mentoring me. They're like, I want you to meet my lawyer, and I go and meet the lawyer, and the lawyer's like, don't raise that round, go do this instead. I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my gosh, like so many startups get trapped in that, like taking advice from people who have no reason to be giving advice.
Yeah, and I think it's because they feel like no one understands them, and so they're like, well, I have to have answers from somebody above me, right? Most of the job of running an org, either startup or 5 years in, is whatever the problems that no one else can solve, you get those ones.
Yeah.
Solve those ones. And so they go, oh, I have to find somebody who's done it before or is smarter than me. And I think this happens in freight the same way. Like you were talking about the startup community in Oregon. It happened to me too. I used to idolize some of the founders in freight until I started doing this, and I was like, oh, they're just doing the same thing, or they're doing it differently. And it was a perception shift for me to be like, oh, building a freight company is just really hard. And that, a lot of these people that I thought were like the heroes of freight never actually made a profit and exited because they had to. I thought it was an exit because they wanted to, until I learned the reality of, I think it was more of a leveraged ABL line of credit off of 110% of receivables, and you had to keep the mouse wheel going until it sold. And then I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that was part of the industry.
I mean,
which is why I talk about VC, but also just ABL lines. If you're funding more than receivables and your only growth curve is revenue, that's like VC, but it's debt, and it's highly leveraged debt. Yeah. And we saw some companies go bankrupt in 2023 because of those ABL lines.
Yeah. I like think about that ecosystem in freight all the time, because there are some people who tout themselves for selling companies when they really didn't. They got bailed out massively, and they advertised the moon that they got acquired. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, that's actually fraud, but that's okay. I mean,
well, I think the reason it's okay for anybody, it's free speech. Anybody can say anything and anybody can believe them or be offended. But when I realized that that's actually what had happened on a lot of these exits, and it wasn't, and it did change my perception, because I started a truckload brokerage and that was a massive failure. I had some bad business partners, and then we parted ways. I don't like to speak ill of anybody, so I'll just leave it at that. But Rocket Shipping in the TMS side and Final Mile is still going really well. The truckload side, I was convinced that because people had done it, that if I just took my model and I partnered with these other folks and gave them equity and we all did it together, that we could build and sell in 3 to 4 years, because there was a company that we were modeling that after. And then I met with their lender out of Chicago, same lender, and was like, yep, I can get you an ABL line of credit. If you have at least 5 million revenue, we can borrow, instead of 90% of revenue, we can give you 105%, but only if quarter over quarter your revenue goes up. And so then we started on this path of contracting with Aldi and Hormel and the US Postal Service and buying freight and not making money, like losing money on the spot and on contract just to meet a revenue number. And I just pulled the rug on the whole thing. I said, this is the riskiest thing I could ever imagine.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't want to go
called
down that route.
gambling.
But the reason that I did it was because I thought I had seen it modeled. And then I saw behind the scenes, I'm like, this isn't how to run a business.
Yeah.
This is like a complete trap.
Yeah.
You're either going to go bankrupt or you're going to get bought out by a big company, and then you're going to end up not getting all your money.
I think that's the craziest thing about building a startup is like a lot of startup founders don't realize like they like, hey, I want to create a product and I have like a vision for this product. They don't realize like you got to take it into market that's super competitive. You have to make money and like build an actual business. That was something that I was not prepared for when I started AVRL.
Same here.
At all.
Yeah.
I did.
I also
like,
learned.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say like I like bought into like the Hollywood vanity of building a startup. It probably wasn't until like the end of year one where I was like, oh, holy cow, I have to build a company, like a full company.
And it has to eventually be profitable, or be profitable as early as possible. It can't just run revenue heavy. And I also think that I said this on a former podcast. We haven't posted it, but I recorded last week. And so this will be said twice. But you can't do two things at once. You can't have a company that you're trying to build and sell in 3 years, 4 years, a tight timeline with venture back or ABL lines, same model, right?
Yeah.
One, you own all the equity and have all the risk and debt. The other one, somebody else gives you money, but they're risking it. Yep. Same North Star. You can't do that and actually have a good culture and hire the right people. It's impossible. You can't serve both masters. I learned that real quick, and I was able to pivot away from that. We were talking about pivoting. I pivoted away from that quickly, and I just pulled the rug and cut my losses, lost 600 grand and said, I'm done with that. But I was able to because I had built an actual company at Rocket where we had, fewer employees and more revenue and more profit. I said, hey, I'll just focus on that. But you talked about product, it's so difficult to be able to know what product the market wants and to be able to actually what we would call product market fit and then build a company around it. That if you do it with somebody else's money and it's not your risk and you're not doing it profitably, it's too easy to make mistakes and you can make them too quickly and you can't recover from those. And I think the reason that bootstrapped or private funding or doing it with safes, which is really impressive to pull off, doing it that way and just using the company's money and maybe taking debt out against the company, but it's like, long-term strategic, allows you to make mistakes more. I know that founders are supposed to fail fast, but you want to have some mistakes be a little bit more spread out. You don't want to have 10 failures in the same quarter. You don't need to learn 10 lessons at once. You might not survive all of them.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the truckload industry in that space, as far as like how many people fail too quickly because they tried all of it at once?
I think that sometimes raising venture capital can be like the worst thing that you can do because you just now have this money and you spend it and you just spend it. It spends so fast. You're not conscious enough about am I making every dollar holler? Then I feel like the best companies that are run, they think about like everything, like second, third order derivatives on how this money is spent and where it goes, etc. I think that raising venture capital can be like a massive curse. There's a lot of companies in natural language processing that have like LLM models that are processing emails right now. I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys are going to have to out-capitalize one another. They're going to have to outspend one another. They're going to have to outmarket. It's going to be commoditized so quickly. There's not going to be any money to be made in that space.
Race to the bottom on that, yeah.
It's a race to the bottom, and then they're going to have to raise a ton of money. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, if I was one of those founders, I would be looking for where is no one else going that I can build a side product on and go after that, because how do you return 30, 40, 50, $100 million when someone's paying you 10 cents an email and you're only focused on a niche market? Like it doesn't exist.
And the biggest players are going to just do it in-house.
Yeah.
The biggest brokerages won't go to a third-party tool. They might start there, but the worst product in freight is one that you start with and then you eventually want to replace. You don't want to be the company that wants to be replaced. And honestly, that's for brokerages, right? That you can take it all the way down to if you're an LTL or truckload broker, LTL is easier to explain, but if you're an LTL broker and the company only spends 500,000 on LTL, they want you to be a broker. They can't go get the rates. But as soon as they spend 2 million, they can just go directly to RNL or FedEx. And so what value do you bring? And so it's always a diminishing return. You can't keep your biggest customers. At Rocket, I do it a little differently. We do TMS so they can use their carriers and ours. But that's because 2 years ago, our biggest customer said, hey, we're going to leave because you're just a broker.
Yeah.
And we can go direct and get the wholesale rate. We don't need to pay retail, even if you're great. If you take that principle in brokerage and you apply it to an AI LLM reading emails, CH Robinson's doing that in-house. They're not using a third-party tool. So you don't want to be building a product that someone's going to eventually try to replace you because it will reduce their COGS.
Yeah.
So,
and this happened to me with a top, I won't use the company's name. They wouldn't like that, but top 5 broker. I worked with them 2 years ago. They told me they were going to go build it themselves. We just re-signed them about a month ago, and we're going to go and build all this stuff. But what we're doing is so different. Like if you look at like a robot, it might look like every single one looks exactly the same. Fundamentally, like we are so much different than everybody else. We pride ourselves on that. So whenever someone's like, we're going to go build this ourselves, we're like, okay, see you soon.
Yeah, you guys are in the catbird seat on that because there's some tech that's easy to replicate and there will be 10 tools to do it, and there's some that isn't. In our business, it's very similar. Sure, you could use 10 portals to go get your 10 carriers and use 3 brokers, or you could do it in our tech and we'll manage it like it's ours.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit easier, and we've had clients leave and come back because they went through 3 logistics managers in the meantime trying to run it themselves, and nobody really likes to do reconsignments and claims. Turns out that's not a great, well-paying job or a fun one. But pivoting a bit, so Chad Olesen, founder of AVRL, we talked a lot about the market, venture capital, and big business ideas. What I maybe don't start at the beginning, but what drives you to build a business? Are you married? Do you have kids? Do you have something else? Is it all business? What is your life like, and why do you run a business? Why'd you start it?
Does not work well with others. I'm like, I remember the last job that I had, I was raising money for a private institution for like R&D, and there were like 10 deals that I had closed. And then you look at like on team, and I'm not on team of any of them. And they didn't give me my bonus because they're like, you weren't on team enough. And I'm like, shit, dude, I fucking am I was the team. And that's like something that I've been trying to work through my whole, through, I don't know, the last 7 years. But I had a hard time working for another organization because I have total founder mentality. Like I'm going to go all in. I'm going to do all the work. I'm going to go above and beyond. I'm going to focus on this from 6 a.m. until I go to bed every single day. That's just, I don't know what drives that. I grew up on a farm, and that's kind of the mentality that my family has, is just we work.
Get her done.
And so that's what originally drove me. At this point, now that we've made such a big impact in 3PL and the carrier market, man, I want to be one of those tech companies that came in and did something that no one else did, and it added value. And I was just talking to Andrew Silver about this on his podcast, a couple weeks ago. It's I'm kind of moving into mission-driven organization now, and my team has a big vendetta to come in and be that tech company that the industry wants, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So does that drive you as far as, I always try to figure out people's motives, right? Does it drive you if you're mission-based, right? Are you trying to impact the industry to leave a lasting mark on it? Does it give you more, joy or fulfillment to just be the best at it? Or what's that angle there? Because for me, it's I just want to be the best at it. I've always just been competitive. I don't need money to motivate me.
Yeah. So when I first came into the industry, I thought that a lot of the 3PLs and carriers were technologically illiterate. And then I realized that they had been burned by so many tech companies over and over and over by selling snake oil. They're not technology illiterate. They're nervous about tech. And what we want to do is we want to bring really complex tools, sophisticated tools to 3PLs and carriers, so that we can teach them really complex strategy with automation. when we look at the market, what a lot of people do is they try and dumb the tech down to like meet the broker where they think the broker's at. That's not the right path. The path is, let's give them complex tools and let's teach them how to use it, and let's teach them complex strategy with complex algorithms, with complex data reporting, and teach them how to leverage that. Like, that's what I want to do. Is I want to be the person that came in and was like, wow, this is how people fundamentally thought about spot bidding. It's like 30 variables, but we could actually use anything, and we can find really like unique ways to look at market intelligence. We can look at like really unique ways to benchmark against the rest of the market on where we buy well, where we sell well, etc. No one's spending the time with a lot of these 3PLs and carriers to do that. That's what we want to do.
Yeah, so if I look at it in 3 buckets in tech, there's 3. Most tech is do it yourself, DIY.
Yep.
Some of it is done for you, and I think that's what you were kind of talking about with these tech companies that will dumb down their product enough for a broker to just like, hey, we'll just implement it for you and we'll go away.
Yeah.
You're kind of talking done with you. Like, hey, we're going to teach you how to get to this level. We're going to meet with you and get insights into what your pricing parameters are, not just the static variables, but maybe that this certain carrier going to Colorado, you can always get X margin, and we have to be able to bid that in.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's bidding on teams instead of singles, and you don't have to bid the algorithm price because the team's going to be the same price because it's contract freight for the USPS, whatever it might be.
Yeah, that goes like super deep. I mean, it could even be like, we don't bid on that freight because it's under 10,000 pounds. We're like, well, what would you do it if fuel was $7 a gallon? Would you do it then? Would you do it? And so like questioning like the reasons why, so that we can come in and build tooling to be like, hey, elevation gain on this route is negative.
Yeah.
We can hedge on this and we can make money on fuel. This is Quaker's freight. This is light. Like, we could actually make money here. And so taking like what they know, like all the brokers are super smart. They're like, but it's all here. But they have reasons why they do things. They have reasons why they don't do things. If we can understand the reasons why they don't do things, we can actually help them with that logic of like, what if we did this instead? Then would you participate on this? And I literally had this call like 2 days ago with one of our customers, and he's like, there were like 2,000 loads that ran on 6 lanes. I'm like, why don't you bid on any of this? He's like, it's under, X amount of mileage distance. And so he's like, every time we buy it, we get burned. So we just put like a 50% premium on there. And I'm like, well, what if we created escalating margins? Like, what if each shipment that you bid on escalated up until we hit our like strike? And what if we could find the markets that you buy below the market on and still make positive margin? But that had never occurred to him before. He'd never thought about like, oh my gosh, I might be able to buy below the market on this lane, and I could probably take like 10 rips before I need to not bid on it, And so like trying to change how they think about strategy.
I like it. So it is, I mean, in my opinion, that's a done with you approach that most tech companies won't touch because it's not scalable in their mind. But if you can keep a customer forever, that is the scale.
The thing is that like we only have to do it. And then they're like, we don't need your help anymore. Like that's that.
You get them
point,
to the target. Yeah. And so you're almost consulting and building the tech. It's a cool approach.
Yeah.
So you can do all that. AVRL is doing that. But one of the questions I like to ask anybody who comes on this show, and I've asked the previous guests, how do you frame hiring and firing? How quickly do you hire? How quickly do you fire? And then I'm going to follow up with that with what's the hardest time in your career of having to fire somebody. But how do you first frame it? Do you hire all the time? Is there certain periods for that? And then how long do you give somebody before they're gone?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the part of the organization. With sales, like in our sales org, a growth team, etc., we tend to build relationships with them. And it might be a slow hire. Like, we might meet someone today and not hire them for 6 months. We want to spend time with them. We want to see them interact. The last person that I hired actually came to a dinner with one of our customers. We had our customer interview her to see if it would be someone that they felt like would fit our culture. But I will fire someone in 30 days on the sales side if they don't work out, which is really fast.
That's super fast. Most people have like a really complex commission draw for like 90 days or 6 months, and then they'd make a decision.
No, we're like super fast on that. On the data side, we put them through really complex testing. And if we hire someone, statistically, we won't fire them because we've gone through and hired them for a very specific problem that we're trying to do. Same thing on the engineering side. Depending on the type of engineer, like if we hire you, you're probably like pretty safe unless we make like a strategic shift. Like we're testing them so much. We got rid of all of our customer success team, dude, and so that's an interesting thing. And like we put project owners right next to our customers, and customer has a problem with the product, they send support AVRL. We use it like we do use AI to triage the message right to the product owner, and they get a response back like immediately. And so
from somebody who can actually fix it instead of someone saying I'll find somebody to fix it. You took a layer out.
Yeah, I think it's been, my customers have told me like, dude, this is like insane. Like I'll respond faster than their internal teams are responding. But it's like what was happening was we put a customer success person there, just like every startup does. They're like, yeah, let me get someone. And then it would take like 2 days before we had resolution on something. But now, like literally support AVRL goes right to that product owner, resolution immediately. And that's like been a huge shift for us. That's not, I don't know if every organization should do that because we had to build a lot of infrastructure and tech that sits in between that structure. It took us like 8 months to build.
Just to get the communication flow and be able to decide who gets what and how quickly they can react and if they have the authority to make a change and all of that, I imagine.
Yeah. And then worst firing, like worst like time that I had. Ooh, dude, pre-pivot, I fired everyone on my team except for 4 people. We went from 40 to 4, and that sucked. And we were running out of money. And I had the 2 people that stay with us went on minimum wage with us. Like, that's insane.
Oh, ride or die.
Think about being an employee. I never talk about her, but we have this person on our team. Her name is Jessica Daniel. And she's our head of operations. Dude, she went on minimum wage with us for like 8 months. Like, this person's like...
in the foxhole with you.
Yeah. So like that is like interesting. But what we did was we went and asked people. We were like, hey, we like can either give you a severance and we will eliminate your position now, or we can put you on minimum wage and then we'll comp you back with stock and and options. And 2 of them were like, I'll take the stock and options. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, damn, they must like really believe in what we're like, where we're going and what we're doing. And then everyone else was like, nah, I'll take the money. And so we just like comped them and said bye. And that just like, it sucked because it also showed like how much they believed in what they had been working on. And I like just remember being like, oh my gosh, dude, all these people, like I hired completely wrong as a startup founder. Like,
Yeah,
it's fine.
I do. And I think that, one, thank you for sharing that. I think most people would be afraid to share that they ever made a mistake or ever had failure. So I'm glad that you shared it because you are a success now and you were before and you figured it out in the meantime.
Yeah.
I think part of it is like every founder wants to do that thought experiment in their head. Like, hey, if I wasn't paying everybody so well, would they still believe in the mission of Rocket or of the ABC company? Who on the team is employee and who is employee owners that really want to see this thing grow? You can look at a lot of metrics, how many people quit, how many people stay for X amount of time, but you never really know. You uniquely did know. And I think that the people that stayed are probably still at AVRL. And I think that Jessica's probably killing it for you. And she's probably been rewarded for that work. So that's a really cool success story from a pivot. So
super interesting. Yeah. Ashwin is the other person who did it. He runs our integrations team and our data teams now. It's like, it's really interesting. Yeah.
It's a superpower though. You can't you could never find 2 people like that again because you would never know if they're that loyal or if they're that mission focused on growing the company. And like, that's a blessing. So I want to get real tactical and provide some value to the audience here. I see every once in a while, I see a post on Twitter or on LinkedIn or I guess on X. Where it's like, hey, what tech stack do you use? Slack or Teams, Google, Zoom, like QuickBooks? How do you do accounting? I want to run through rapid fire. What do you guys use for communication internal?
Teams.
Okay. But you better
call me. We have like a
Okay.
call culture. Like, I don't want you to write me. Like, engineering, cool. But if you're in like sales, if you're on our like customer support team, if you're like on onboarding, you better dial.
If they want to talk with you, and then
Well,
internally.
everyone internally,
Okay, I like
like,
it.
yeah, full communication. I do not like burying, taking 30 minutes to just come to a resolution that could be solved in like a second.
Oh, I like it. I like it. Okay. How do you communicate with customers? Do they email in? Do you have like a help desk support email, or how did that work? Or did you build that
So,
yourself?
so we built that ourselves. And literally they write either, we have like a full ticketing system that they can go into, but
Hmm.
they can write to support@avrl.io and it'll get triaged like directly. Um,
Cool.
to be perfectly honest though, a lot of our customers will text my team, call my team directly.
And they just get it resolved right away, and they can communicate it clearly instead of over, a Slack or a Teams. Okay.
Yeah.
So, how do you guys invoice out? Do you use QuickBooks, NetSuite, Great Plains? How are you sending invoices?
We have our own invoice system. We are profitable, and what profitable tech companies have to deal with is sales tax.
Yes.
And sales tax is a really complex nightmare, and so you have to use a system called AVRL that looks like down to the city, the county, like the zip code. And so we had to build our own invoice system that connected into AVRL and then reports that data back to our accountant. Super fun.
So by necessity, you had to. You had to invest in that instead of just using a tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. I didn't even know that. That's something I just learned right now. That it's kind of like e-commerce, then, right? I know in e-commerce world, you got to figure that stuff out.
Yeah, and it's really challenging. Like if you look at like the city of Chicago as an example, like they don't have sales tax, but they have lease tax. And if you're leasing software, it applies into lease tax. And I learned this because I got a letter from the city of Chicago saying that I owed a ton of money, and we
Best
had
way
to
to
like,
learn something.
yeah, we had to hire lawyers and accountants to come in and figure that out. And that's really like why we were like, we got to like really be like on top of this.
Okay. How do you send
Yeah,
documents? DocuSign, PandaDoc. You got your own software for documents too. When you're signing
DocuSign,
an MSA, is it just PDFs? What do you do?
DocuSign, PDF DocuSign.
DocuSign.
Yeah,
All right. I'm a
yep.
PandaDoc guy, but mostly because our head of revenue was the VP of sales at PandaDoc before, so he did convert me. We were on DocuSign.
I like that.
All
Yeah.
right. Continuing the rapid fire payroll. Do you use Ripple, Gusto? You run it in house with the CPA?
Dude, payroll is complex at AVRL. We have teams in Canada, we have teams in Europe, we have teams in Asia. So we run 3 different PEOs and ADP for anyone that's on my core team.
Okay.
So
And then do
for
you guys do like a first and 15th W-2, or do you have like all kinds of different 1099
it's
because they're international?
and it depends. Like we have an employee in Colorado, and we have to comply with Colorado like pay terms. It's just different. Like, like yeah,
People don't realize this. This is good value for those listening. Like if you're a W-2 employee, you just get a direct deposit. But when
yeah,
I am setting up I started Rocket during COVID, all of our employees are from different states, which is
yeah,
sweet. Remote work. Yeah, but I have to pay a different unemployment insurance tax on each state, and
yeah,
then I have to pay a different payroll tax, and I have to have Rocket has to be set up in every state in order to pay the quarterly payroll reports for each state.
yep.
So if I hire somebody in Chicago, it's a different rate that I pay. And then if I have an employee in Maine, although I always say he lives in New Hampshire, so I hope he doesn't watch this because I always say he's from New Hampshire. And then I have Florida, and it's all different things. Compliance is the worst.
Yeah,
Like being
it's
able to
rough.
say, all right, now one of my employees moved to Michigan. That took 6 weeks for us to we had to use CorpNet to get us set up with a tax ID there because it was impossible. Tennessee, just everything's over mail, like snail mail.
Yep.
They would
Oh,
they
dude.
wouldn't email anything. They had to send it in the mail for me to get a code,
Yep.
which is my favorite thing. It was like two-factor authentication, except for they mailed it.
Insane. I have employees in Tennessee, and I get to deal with that. I was, like also I had an employee in Alabama, and I was like, I can't deal with Alabama, dude. I just
You're gonna need to move.
yeah.
So that's fun. We can go into more, but I think I'll pivot back to who's Chad Olesen outside of AVRL? What do you do besides sit in Sedona and look at that beautiful mountain?
Oh man. I've been talking to a lot of people about this, man. I'm like kind of going through a little bit of a dilemma because I don't have any hobbies. That's crazy. That's like a
You gotta start
crazy thing.
golfing, dude. It's fun.
So the thing about golfing is like I'll go golfing and then like someone will blow me up at work, and then now I'm focused on that, and then I suck at golf, and now I'm just like getting worse at golf, like that's like a whole thing. I like to hike. I like to four by four. I go up into like Telluride, Ouray, and like Silverton, Colorado, and go like they call it jeeping, but I don't have a Jeep, so I like to do stuff like that. I like to ride motorcycles. I like to do that stuff. Yeah.
That tracks. That tracks. So I want to get into some current events. Yesterday, we were both posting on LinkedIn about this new 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada, which, to preface, I don't think will ever go into effect. But
Yeah.
let's do a thought experiment. How do you think about the macro and how it affects your business? Or do you just live in the micro and just say AVRL controls what we control? It doesn't matter who's in office or what tariffs are in. I know there are several companies that are like, if you're a cross-border, Matt Silver's a cross-border brokerage for exchanging freight from Mexico to U.S. I explained that poorly, but I'll have to invite him on the pod to get him to do a better job. But I mean, that would really affect his business if the imports slow down or if brokers had to pay more. But how do you think of that? And then I do want your like edgy opinion on what do you think will happen with this, as far as will the tariff go in place and what would that do?
I'll answer the first one or the second one first. Like, I think it's a negotiation tactic. Like, I really do. And so I also agree. Like, I don't think it's going to go into effect the way that they're talking about it today. We live in the micro, dude. Like, we can't control that stuff. So we just, we just operate it. And the only thing is like with current administration, I would just like to wake up and know what sport I'm playing every day. I don't like sometimes we're like doing this and then this and then this. Like, I just like, so some of the things that happen probably affect me mentally because I'm like, damn it, I have to worry about this now. Mm-hmm. But we tend to not think like too much about that stuff from an organization structure piece. Like, we're just heads down, going.
Amen. I love that. And if someone looked from the outside in at my social media and what I talk about, they'd be like, oh, he lives in the macro. I just love politics. I always have. And I'm kind of like a weirdo for that. I've always been interested in politics. And like someday I want to be the governor of North Dakota. So I'm going to make that happen. Yeah. But I love that side of it. So I like to debate and I like to talk about it. But Rocket, we do LTL home delivery, final mile home delivery, and we build tech around it to make it better for our customers. And that's all we control. And we're going to get 100 customers a year because we're going to get 9.5 a month. And we're going to do that predictably and repeatably. And hopefully we only churn like 5% of our customers. Yeah. If there's more venture capital and private equity in the markets because there's optimism, those companies will ship more. But I've been in 2 cycles now. 2020, I had a bunch of customers that didn't ship anything for a long time. And it was quite scary because we only made money as a brokerage at the time. Yeah. And then 2023 or 2021 to 2020, January 2023, it was like, you didn't have to be good at freight. You just had to exist. And then 2023, hardest year I've ever had in business. Every one of our e-com brands, and we're heavy in e-com home delivery, was down 30, 40, 50% in volume. Mm-hmm. And that was a hit on our revenue. But between 2023 and 2024, we lost $800,000 of receivables that were never paid to us. Damn. Because companies went under and we were extending them credit. This summer, we lost $534,000 on one customer. They just went under unexpectedly. And I thought they had recovered from, the COVID boom. They didn't. So there's still that lingering effect. It affects us, but living in the micro is the only way to run your business, according to you, me, and Chamath Palihapitiya on the All In Pod. He talks about it all the time.
He's one of my investors.
Chamath is one of your investors?
Social Capital is one of our safe holders, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome, dude. I love listening to that podcast. Okay, so a couple of personal questions. One, what podcast do you listen to? How do you learn? Do you read? Do you listen? Do you research?
I read mostly. I read a lot. I don't listen to a whole lot of podcasts, to be honest. I listen to like some of the freight pods, but I don't listen to a ton of podcasts outside of that.
There you go. Yeah. So you're a reader. Are you fiction or nonfiction? Like you reading business books to get better, or you like to actually unplug when you read?
I'm reading to get smarter about not messing up my business.
That's how I do it too. I like when I was building Rocket, or the first go round, I was just a sales guy. So I would always just read sales books on how to build a pipeline. Like I love to read for that side. I also don't read as much as I used to because I won't read a full book. I just read like certain chapters to get a little value out of it, and then I might skip some of it and read another chapter and say, okay, I get it. But I'm a big podcast guy now. I just always have one playing.
That's cool. I'm going to Hawaii tomorrow, and I'm taking Anthony Bourdain's book. I haven't ever read it, and I just got it, and I'm really excited. I'm not going to. That's not a business book, but I'm going to read that. So.
But I think it's like a personal development almost, right?
Yeah.
So, and if you develop personally, I bet the business does too. So it goes in the same. But you're going to Hawaii. So my next question actually is, what do you vacation? Do you travel? I mean, I know you're in Sedona. I ask this to everybody as well. And some people are like, I got to leave the country once a year. And some are like, I don't go anywhere. I'm at my desk. Where are you at on that spectrum?
I'm a traveler, man. I'm actually going through this like little personal crisis. I'm having a baby in January, and I don't have any kids.
First baby?
First baby, yeah. And I travel like all the time, all the time. And like I have friends that are like sailing and living in Bora Bora, and I have friends that are living in Africa right now, and a lot of them are like, hey, you should come. My buddy just bought a ski lodge in Japan, and he's retrofitting it out, and he's like, hey, you should come and like go skiing and like in March. I'm like, I should.
And then your wife is like, yeah, you should totally not do that.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and recently adopted a 2-year-old. So now I've got 3. So I travel all the time as well. But now it's like the travel I do. So here's my advice. I still travel, but my travel sucks now because I leave at 5 a.m. and then I take a red eye back the next day. So I'm not gone for like more than a night or two. So I used to enjoy going to see Seattle or Vancouver or Denver. And now I'm like, I'm out with clients. We service a lot of clients in the Midwest who like to drink their Busch Light. And if you can't drink with them, you can't have them as a customer. So I have a lot of late drinking nights of Busch Light, and then I have to fly at 4 a.m. So my travel sucks now because of my lovely children, and I want to spend time with them. So as a closing note here, what do you think is the one thing that you could have changed, and like not a mistake you made even, but I ask every founder and CEO this same question. What's something that you made a mistake on, or something that happened that you didn't need to make that somebody else could hear and say, okay, I'll skip that little learning. It doesn't have to be, and one of the founders answered, all the mistakes made me where I am today. But is there anything that you did that was just stupid? And you're like, hey, if I could tell somebody to avoid that, they don't have to go through the trouble. They'll learn from Chad.
So stupid. Yeah, definitely. I actually just talked about this with Andrew Silver as well. Like it came up like organically, but when we first came into the industry, our first customers were like top 10 3PLs. I literally think that like our first 5 customers were in the top 10. And that made it really hard for us to go downstream. Mm-hmm. And as we started going down to like, top 50, we were like, oh my gosh, these guys are so dumb. They can't figure it out. This is like their problem, not ours. And we it didn't look introspectively and be like, we need to create new tooling. We need to change, and we need to like get them up to speed. And I think as a founder, you can either be like, this is someone else's problem, and you can never fix it if it's someone else's problem. Or you can be like, my customer's problem is my problem, and we have to fix it, or at least do as much as we can to fix said problem. And this is something that I learned like pretty late, actually. I was probably year 4, 5 in, but I had only been working with Fortune 10, Fortune 25 companies before we came into freight. And so like I had just been surrounded by these massive data teams, these really intelligent people that are educated in the topics that we're trying to solve. When we started to work with people who hadn't, and this is like a brand new thing for them, mm-hmm. I didn't take it from that approach. I was just like, they can't figure it out. That's their problem. Leave them behind. And that was like completely huge miss by me. That was like an organization thing that I shoved internally to my team. My team adopted that mentality. That was bad.
Yeah, those are the worst mistakes, when you make a mistake that affects like more than just one thing, right? It's actually more of almost setting the culture from the top down as a mistake. And I hate when I do those things, because they're more consequential, right? And if I just make little mistakes, like no one realizes it, but one of those is bad. So I think one, I appreciate you coming on and sharing this much insight. If you guys are listening to this, like this is real insight from somebody who's built a massive business and along the way had to restart it and pivot. So take some of these valuable lessons and actually implement them. And his advice was, being able to differentiate what your problem is versus what a customer is. And if you're going to own it and fix it, or if you're going to ignore it and say, hey, that's not our business problem. I think most of the founders would have similar advice on, hey, if I would have just fixed this sooner, or if I would have realized that. You can't obviously know, but if you're listening and you're in a similar situation, now you can learn from Chad, learn from AVRL, and I appreciate you coming on, man. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.